actually condemn it? I think that's the question.
If I was ever on news like this, my answer would be, it's not about what I condemn, Sarah, or whatever your name is. Excuse me. It's not about what I think. This is about what international law says. In matters of geopolitical diplomatic resolutions, we defer to the authority of the United Nations, which was forged by the United States and which gave the international birth certificate to Israel. And what they tell us is that armed resistance against an occupier is a protected human right. It's not only a right, but it's a responsibility of the occupied people to not consent to their own annihilation. And that is in fact what you have. That is the dynamic that has been present in the Gaza Strip. It is the principal contradiction between an occupied people and an occupying force, of an oppressed people versus an oppressor, the colonized people and the colonizers. So if you want to condemn Hamas like you love to talk about, then I will tell you, don't stop there. Go further. Stick to your principles. If that's your assertion, go ahead and condemn the Jews in the Warsaw Ghetto for resisting an armed conflict against their Nazi oppressors. Tell me that the Nazis had the right to defend themselves too. Tell me that you also condemn the slaves that revolted in the 1830s against their slave owners. Tell me all of these things, because you are ideologically principally tied to that argument now. If you want to be consistent and you don't want to look like a buffoon on public television, if you don't want to look like a hypocrite, then you must also apply that same standard that you're applying to the Palestinians to other historical social groups that have faced the same subjugation. So I'm not sure of what Zoran said here, but I'm certain he played both sides. They all condemn Hamas, but that is an ideological trap, is my point. The moment that you start doing that is the moment you start sanitizing the occupation, and that we cannot have. And it's always the Zionist tactic of making it about you, making it about your person, engaging in character assassination, making it about what you personally say. You condemn Hamas, because if you do, then we can assassinate your character. And what we need to remind them is that we are not personal about this. This is objective international law. This is a matter of universal humanitarian law. And we can point to the Geneva Conventions of 1949. We can point to the Nuremberg trial, where you had the prosecuting attorney admit that what the Nazis did and what World War II had to endure, what the world had to endure in World War II, was the fault of the Nazis in their initial act of aggression, which was the supreme international crime, he maintained, which, because it bore the responsibility for the accumulated evil of the whole, which is an interesting expression that has stuck with me. The crime of aggression is the supreme international crime because it bears with it the accumulated evil of the whole. It is not only guilty of the initial crime of aggression, it's guilty of all the subsequent reprisals against the crime of aggression, which created the conditions for that, okay? So it's always Israel's fault, going back to 1967, formally by the UN, which gave the Israeli state the international birth certificate that it enjoys. Even the institution that created Israel condemns Israel and has condemned Israel in resolution passed after resolution passed, year after year after year, going as far back as 1967. So when you say condemn Hamas, you are normalizing every decade before Hamas was even created as a social need to resist the occupation, which was brutal and unrelenting. This is not about Hamas. This is about the occupation. It all goes back to the occupation. It's the only thing that people need to understand in this situation. There are many complex geopolitical events in the world, and this is not one of them. I understand that it absolutely goes back to 1947. If you want to zoom out even further, it goes back to 1917. And if you want to zoom out even further, it goes back to 1897. Okay? But the point is, rhetorically, what I'm saying is that formally, by the institution that created the state of Israel, it goes back to 1967. That institution which gave the right for Israel to exist, even that institution condemns Israel. And they never want to talk about that. They will never tell you about UN Resolution 242. They never want to mention the mounting evidence of crimes against humanity that has been piling up on UN tables and desks over the years that condemn condemn Israel, that hold Israel to account for its brutal crimes and its brutal occupation. We can go through it bit by bit by bit, every part of the history that you want to go through. It is always Israel at fault. Always. You do not condemn armed resistance against a brutal, monopolistic, violent occupation. And the last thing I'll say is that this is something that the Greeks understood. The ancient Greeks, thousands of years ago, did not condemn Hamas because the ancient Greeks understood something that escapes society today, seemingly, which is that no legal right or no moral right can trace back to an illegal wrong. No moral right can be invoked or traced back to an illegal wrong. Ex injuria jus non oritur. It is a Latin legal maxim meaning law does not arise from injustice, indicating that illegal acts cannot create legal rights. What is Israel trying to do right now? Create a legal right of self-defense from an illegal occupation. You have no right to defend yourself in occupied territories. That is essential to understanding what's going on here. The phrase ex injuria jus non oritur translates to law does not arise from injustice. This principle asserts that one cannot establish a legal right or claim based on an unlawful act. In other words, if a right is claimed based on an illegal action, that claim is invalid. So the Israeli claim to self-defense is invalid, in fact. This is a basic understanding that the ancient Greeks understood and which was codified and formalized in the Geneva Conventions, and even before that, during World War I, the first Geneva Conventions, the first iteration of international law at the outset of World War I also understood this, and this is something that all countries sign on to whether they like it or not, you know? I can't reiterate enough my strategy of when they want to say condemn Hamas. I always start with world's smartest Zionists try not to take the conversation personal when presented with the historical record, when presented with international laws, challenge impossible, seemingly, because they all want to make it personal. It's about what you think. It's about the fact that you are saying this and you have long frizzy hair. Even by the jurisprudence of these legal liberal institutions that were forged and which ultimately created the climate for Israel to do what it does, they condemn Israel. I condemn Israel going back to, of course, to its inception. And I condemn the Zionist movement going back all throughout the 20s, what's known as the interwar period. I condemn the Zionists and the British Empire for colonizing Palestine. People,
both of the Jewish faith and beyond, have. Do you condemn that phase, globalize the Intifada, which a lot of people hear as a call to violence against Jews?
Okay, first of all, globalize the Intifada is not a call for violence against Jews, and that's been told to us, that's been admitted to me by the very Israeli official that was intimately involved in administering the Oslo Accords in the 90s and presided and was in power during the second Intifada, who admitted that the Intifada really just means an authentic struggle for Palestinian independence. That's a verbatim quote for you. So when you say Intifada means violence against the Jews, I say bullshit. And that is rejected by Israeli officials themselves. And by all accounts, both the first and the second intifadas began peacefully. They were peaceful protestations. Aren't we allowed to protest our government? Don't we have the right to peacefully assemble in the United States? So that's what the intifada was. It was a protestation of the occupation. If you want to pearl clutch about resistance slogans, what about the actual occupation, the actual initial crime of aggression? Again, it always goes back to occupation. What were the slogans for Jewish liberation from the Nazi camps? Can we think of any? You know, can we substitute that? Put that into this question, this line of questioning. Free the slaves. What did you mean by free the slaves? It sounds like it's a lot of violence against the slave owners. Do you condone freeing the slaves? When you say free Palestine, I really just hear violence against the. Do you condemn the slaves too? We understand the slave owners might be doing some things wrong, but do you also condemn the slaves? No, we abolish slavery. We abolish that class antagonism. That relationship should not be in modern society, right? Well, the relationship that Israel enjoys in Palestine should not be in modern society.
I've heard from many Jewish New Yorkers who have shared their concerns with me. I don't believe that the role of the mayor is to police speech.
Quickly, for the people who care about the language and who feel really concerned by that phrase.
Gosh, we're really concerned by that phrase. You know, when you called me out for supporting a genocide, it really concerned me. You used some words that they're very disconcerting and very concerning. Again, Sarah, your questions should be aimed at international institutions. I'm just running for mayor of New York City. This is a matter of international law. This is armed conflict between two countries, okay? Apparently. Again, I will point you to UN Resolution 242. I'll point you to all these liberal documents. You can have your own little liberal with them because you love liberalism. Well, even your own liberal institutions condemn Israel and don't condemn the occupied people, okay? Even Mahatma Gandhi could understand this, and he was a pacifist, and he doesn't condemn Hamas, okay?
My concern is to start to walk down the line of language and making clear what language I believe is permissible or impermissible.
Spoken like a true salesman right there. He had 3 chances. Oh, and he did. He's still giving the bare, minimum of rejection of that kind of rhetoric. He's just being a shifty, crafty politician in his answer. And it's not enough for these people. He didn't condemn the globalize the intifada. Why didn't he condemn the enchilada?